The hive still hums. That's the first thing that throws you. Walk up to it on a warm morning in early summer. Put your ear near the entrance and you hear that familiar low sound. It sounds like a colony that's working, but something is off, and most experienced beekeepers feel it before they even crack the cover. The forager traffic has been thin for weeks, the entrance is quieter than it should be for the time of year and the weather, and when you finally pull the first frame and hold it up to the light, you see it. Scattered drone brood packed into worker cells. Sometimes 2 eggs, sometimes 3, laid at odd angles along the walls instead of straight down at the base the way a mated queen lays them. Not what a queen does, what a worker does when she starts laying. And right then, before you've even put the frame back, you're already running through your options. And if you've faced this before, you already know that none of them feel right. Because the last time you faced it, none of them worked cleanly. A laying worker colony is one of the most stubborn conditions in managed beekeeping. Not because it's rare, not because it's complicated to diagnose. It's stubborn because the conventional responses, the ones every beginner is taught and every intermediate beekeeper reaches for, fail at a specific biological point that most descriptions of the problem never fully explain, and the method that actually works sounds so wrong the first time you hear it that most beekeepers put it aside and try something else. That instinct costs them the colony. There is a method that the working beekeepers of the early 20th century documented and applied with real consistency. Not in academic journals, in the practical notes of commercial operations and the management habits of regional beekeepers who kept records across seasons because losing a colony had consequences they couldn't absorb. That method has been sitting in the record for over 100 years. It still sounds wrong every time someone first encounters it. That's the reason it never made it into the standard literature in the form it deserved. If this kind of biology-first approach is useful to you, leave a comment below about your own experience with laying worker colonies. A like on this video helps the channel reach the beekeepers who need it. To understand why the conventional fixes fail, you have to understand what a laying worker colony actually is at the biological level. Not just what it looks like on the frames. What it is when a colony loses its queen. The event that follows isn't immediate, it's gradual, and its timing determines how much recovery space the colony has. The queen produced a chemical signal, a blend of compounds called queen mandibular pheromone, that moved through the colony continuously, passed from bee to bee through contact and trophallaxis. One of that pheromone's central functions was suppression of ovarian development in workers. As long as the queen was present and healthy, that suppression held across tens of thousands of individuals. Workers had ovaries. They simply didn't activate them. When the queen is gone, the suppression begins to lift. But there's a second layer of suppression that most beekeepers aren't taught to account for. Open brood, young larvae, also produce a pheromone compound that suppresses worker ovarian development. A queenless colony that still carries open brood retains this secondary chemical restraint. Nurse bees exposed to that open brood signal continue to suppress their own reproductive biology. This is why a colony that loses its queen but still has young larvae can often raise an emergency queen before the colony slides into the laying worker condition. The brood pheromone buys time. It covers the gap. But here's the piece that almost every account of laying workers glosses over. The brood pheromone only holds that suppression while the open brood is continuously present. The larvae that existed when the queen died develop on their own schedule. They cap, they emerge, and as they do, the open brood population declines. If the queen's loss went unnoticed for long enough, if the final brood she laid finished capping before the beekeeper caught the queenless condition, the open brood disappears entirely, and when it does, the suppression lifts across a wide portion of the colony's worker population. Not one rogue bee, not a handful of outliers. Potentially dozens or hundreds of workers begin to develop partially active ovaries at roughly the same time. That's the biological condition that makes a laying worker colony so hard to reverse. It isn't a single problem to locate and remove. It's a distributed, colony-wide reproductive shift, driven by the simultaneous absence of two suppressive signals that had previously held the colony's social structure in place. By the time the scattered drone brood is visible on the frames, the colony has been queenless for at least 3 weeks, in many cases significantly longer. The beekeeper who opens that hive is looking at the result of a process that was already well underway before there was anything to see. That matters, because the 3 fixes most beekeepers attempt when they find a laying worker colony all fail at the same biological point. Understanding exactly where they fail is not discouraging. It's the only map that shows you where the real path is. The first attempt is queen introduction. Find a mated queen, cage her properly, introduce her to the colony with the expectation that a queenless colony will accept any healthy laying queen. Within 24 to 48 hours, the cage is covered in bees with a specific quality of hostile attention. Tight, persistent, and the queen is killed. The reason is this: laying workers don't only take over the queen's egg-laying function, they begin producing pheromone compounds that alter the colony's chemical identity. The colony stops registering itself as queenless. It begins registering itself as queen-right, with a reproductive cohort already in place. A new mated queen introduced into that environment isn't received as a solution to a vacancy. She's received as a competing reproductive in a colony that has already filled the position. The bees that kill her are, from their chemical perspective, defending a social status quo that they believe to be intact. The second attempt is brood introduction. A frame of young open larvae from a healthy colony, shaken free of its bees, slid into the laying worker colony. The idea is that the open brood pheromone will resuppress the laying worker's ovaries and the colony will raise an emergency queen from the young larvae. This sometimes works. It works most reliably in colonies that have been laying worker for a shorter period, where the reproductive shift hasn't fully consolidated. In a colony 6 or 8 weeks into the condition, it frequently fails in a specific and discouraging way. The workers accept the brood, they nurse it, and then they destroy the queen cells before they mature. The colony's current reproductive investment suppresses its own rescue. The third attempt is the newspaper combine. Merge the laying worker colony with a strong queen-right colony through a paper barrier, slow enough that the pheromone environments mix before the populations make direct contact. Sometimes this works. It works poorly when the laying worker colony is large, when its chemical identity is so entrenched that it overwhelms rather than yields to the queen-right colony's pheromone environment. And every newspaper combine carries the risk of introducing the laying worker condition into a previously healthy population. Every beekeeper who has kept bees long enough has a memory of a laying worker colony they tried every one of these things on, and lost anyway. There's a detail about being inside a laying worker colony that most accounts of this condition don't mention. Open one and don't just look at the frames, watch how the bees move across them. In a queen-right colony, the movement has a structure to it, bees with direction, communication chains, a background flow organized around the demands of the brood nest. A laying worker colony moves differently. There's something aimless in it, bees running short distances without apparent purpose, clusters forming without obvious function. The noise is there, but the organization underneath it isn't. This isn't mysticism, it's biology. The informational economy of a healthy colony is built on a communication network centered on the queen's location and the brood nest's demands. Recruitment signals, dance language, trophallaxis carrying chemical information about resources and need. A laying worker colony has fragmented that structure. The center isn't where it should be. The bees are running the network without a reliable signal source. The beekeepers who documented the field shaking method in the early American literature, those working in the Ohio and Indiana commercial operations of the 1890s through the 1920s, described the problem in exactly those terms. A colony that had lost its governing purpose, And they described the method they applied in terms of what it recovered, not the colony, the portion of the colony still capable of accepting new purpose. That framing sounds almost poetic. The biology behind it is precise. If this kind of historically grounded, biology-first reasoning is useful to you, a subscription keeps this coming. Every bee that has spent time foraging from a fixed location has made a specific set of neurological investments. During her first orientation flights as a young forager, she encoded the sun's position, the visual landmarks around the hive entrance, the precise spatial coordinates of where home was. That navigational memory is not generalized. It belongs to the location she learned. She can find her way back to that location from several hundred feet away with a reliability that has been documented and studied in detail. This capacity is what foraging requires and what the forager phase of a bee's life builds. A laying worker has not made those investments. The bees whose ovaries activate in a queenless colony are disproportionately younger workers. Bees that were in the nurse phase when the queen was lost, bees that were held inside the colony by the physiological demands of brood rearing during the period when they would have been making orientation flights. Many of them have never navigated at distance. They've never built the sun compass that foragers rely on. They've never encoded the landmarks around the entrance as navigational reference points. They are, behaviourally, inside bees, even though they're laying. This is the distinction the field shaking method exploits. It does not attempt to fix the laying workers. It separates the colony into two populations based on a biological capacity that no visual inspection can reveal. And it does it through a single physical action that most beekeepers resist the first time they hear about it. Here is what the method looks like in practice. The mechanics are specific, and the temptation to modify them in ways that undermine the biology is real. You confirm the laying worker diagnosis. Scattered drone brood in worker cells. Multiple eggs per cell. Off-angle placement. No queen cells being tended. You wait a full day to be certain. Then you choose a morning with good flying weather, warm and calm enough that foragers would be actively working under normal conditions. You carry the entire hive, every box and every frame, to a new location, at least 200 feet from where it stood. Some beekeepers use 300. The distance matters. It needs to exceed the reliable navigational range of bees that have never made full forager orientation flights. At that location, you remove each frame one at a time and give it one firm shake over the ground. Not gentle. A single sharp motion that dislodges the bees clustered on the comb. You do this for every frame. You set the empty frames back into the box at the new location. Then you walk back to where the original hive stood. And you wait. A fire's meek steals tid style. Within an hour, you'll see it. Foragers are returning to the original location. They lifted off the ground where you shook them, oriented to the sun and the landmarks they had encoded, and navigated home. There is no home there yet, but they return to the coordinates anyway. That's what their navigation tells them to do. That's all it tells them. The laying workers don't do this. Some will cluster near the frames at the new location. Others will mill. A small number may find their way to the original site over time. But the majority won't make that 200-foot crossing with any reliability, because they never built the map that would allow it. An hour or two after the shaking, you return to the original hive location. You'll find a cluster of returned foragers waiting where the entrance used to be. You set down a box with a few empty drawn frames. They move in, and into that reassembled population, which is forager dominant and whose laying worker concentration has been substantially reduced, you introduce a mated queen in a cage within 2 to 3 hours of reassembly. This population accepts her at a dramatically higher rate than the original colony would have. The chemical identity of the reassembled group is no longer built around laying worker pheromone in the same concentration. The competing reproductive signal has been diluted by the separation. The window for queen acceptance is real, and it is narrow. Work inside it. The bees that came back to the original location don't know what happened to the ones that didn't. That's the whole point. This is not a procedure without limits. A colony that has been in laying worker condition long enough that most of its older forager bees have died off, a colony where the bulk of the remaining population is younger nurse-type bees, will not reassemble a sufficient cluster at the original site. You shake them, and very few return. What comes back is too small to maintain cluster temperature around a new queen through the acceptance period. In that condition, the newspaper combined with a strong queen-right colony is the more defensible choice, despite its limitations with larger laying worker populations. The method also requires warm season conditions. Shaking bees onto the ground when overnight temperatures will fall below 50 degrees risks chilling the reassembled cluster before the queen is laying. Field shaking belongs to late spring through midsummer, not fall, not early spring, and the queen introduced must be a mated laying queen. A queen cell introduces a minimum delay of 10 to 14 days before any eggs are laid. A reassembled population that's small, that recently disrupted, does not have the demographic buffer to sustain itself through that delay with any confidence. A mated queen introduced within a few hours of reassembly gives the colony the fastest possible path back to a stable brood cycle. Why this method fell out of the published beekeeping literature in the mid-20th century follows the same logic as every other effective low-cost practice that disappeared in the same era. The post-war commercial expansion of American beekeeping organized itself around accessible, demonstrable procedures that could be recommended without appearing to involve abandonment of bees or intentional losses. Shaking thousands of bees onto the ground and walking away does not photograph well for an instruction manual. It looks on the page like something has gone wrong. The newspaper combine kept all the bees visible and in the box. It felt like beekeeping. The field shaking method felt like something else. What it actually felt like, to the beekeepers who used it across multiple seasons and kept records of the results, was like solving the right problem instead of the comfortable one. If you've opened a laying worker colony and run through your options and felt that familiar weight of knowing that none of them was going to be clean, that memory is worth sitting with for a moment. Not because it was a failure, because it was the experience that makes the biology of this method legible in a way that reading about it alone cannot. The foragers are the solution. The laying workers aren't the problem you fix. They're the population you separate from the solution. Everything that works against this condition follows from that single biological fact. We used to know this. The knowing didn't disappear because it was wrong. It disappeared because the industry that grew up around beekeeping in the mid-20th century organized its advice around methods with more visible procedural comfort and less biological precision. The biological facts have not changed. Foragers still encode navigational memory during orientation flights. Nurse phase bees that develop into laying workers still lack that encoding. The separation is still real, still exploitable, and still the most direct path back to a functional colony from the condition that most beekeepers write off as a loss. If this kind of historically grounded precision changes how you approach the hard colonies, subscribe. There's more ahead. The kind of method that took a generation of observation to trust and takes exactly one sentence to sound impossible.